Hello, my name is Hannah Burnett. I am the OWFL Director of Officiating. Thank you so much for joining us tonight for this intro to women's lacrosse, intro to women's field lacrosse at the U13, U15, and 19 levels. Those are going to be the levels of play that we're looking at throughout tonight's presentation. This presentation will be shared across our OWFL officiating YouTube channel, on our website, along with the slide deck after the call tonight. And if you registered for the call, I will be sending it out directly to you via email. So thank you for taking the time for being here. Thank you for taking the time to watch the call on our YouTube channel. We will jump right into things. We will start tonight with a land and sport acknowledgement. The indigeneity of our game is incredibly important. And at the U15, U19, and Jewel levels of play, we always start our pre-games with the captains, with our parent reps, with this land and sport acknowledgement. So we'll do the same tonight. At this time, we would like to give thanks to the creator for giving us the game of lacrosse. Lacrosse is medicine to the Haudenosaunee, the people of the Longhouse, and we want to thank them for sharing this medicine with the world. We would also like to give thanks to all First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples as we all sit in their territories. We say thank you to the creator for giving us Mother Earth. She then gave us the tree that our sticks are made from. This is the true roots of the medicine we call lacrosse today. Thank you. As I mentioned, my name is Hannah. I'm the OWFL Director of Officiating. I think I've been involved in the board since 2022. It all kind of blends together, and it's been a really wonderful 4 years. I am a WO1 internationally rated official, so I have had the opportunity to participate in World Cups dating back to 2017, which is exciting. I'm hoping to be in July. I've been invited to be in July this August, and July as part of sorry, I've been invited to be in Japan for the World Championships this July and August, which is another really exciting opportunity in my officiating career. But the reason I'm presenting this stuff tonight is because I care very deeply about sharing the game with our community and helping to maybe demystify some of the rules of our game. My personal motto is that no rule is a secret. So I'm really dedicated to creating resources to help foster an understanding of our game across our community, particularly in the OWFL. And my background is as a player, coach, and official. So I started playing in high school when I was in the ninth grade with a really talented high school team based out of Whitby, and I just kind of lucked out growing up in a lacrosse community and found it in high school. I played all through university, played at Wilfrid Laurier University in the OUA. And I started officiating in 2009. So this has been a big part of my life for 17 years, which is kind of crazy. Um, I am, in addition to being the OWFL Director of Officiating, I am also the official in charge for Lacrosse Canada for women's field lacrosse. And I'm a member of the World Lacrosse Rules Committee for women's field. So I'm part of the team that helps write and edit the rule books for women's field lacrosse. And every single time we have to do one of those projects, we're hoping to make it better and better and more accessible for our local communities as well as for athletes on an international stage. Um, so yeah, that's a little bit about me. I'm also a huge film nerd. So if you ever see me at the fields, you want to talk rules, I'd love that. You want to talk movies, I'd also love that. And this is me accepting an Oscar at my mother's Oscar party when I was 8. Just a little bit about me. Thank you again for joining. And we'll move right along. Tonight's goals, our learning outcomes. I'd like to provide a very brief overview of the OWFL and our programs that we offer. We're going to be introducing U13, U15, and U19 level of play rules, including modifications that are specific to these levels of play. Uh, we don't have a ton of modifications anymore at these levels. So tonight's really going to be focused on what are the key rules, what are our points of emphasis for officials this year, and I'm going to try and put a specific emphasis on for athletes coming from U11 into U13 for the first time. What can they expect? What are the main kind of differences as we start to move into what we call real lacrosse, full field, tens, possession on the draw, all those kinds of things. I'm looking to build avenues for spectators and coaches to inform themselves, to contribute to a positive environment for our athletes and our officials on the field. And I want to foster an appreciation of this phenomenal game. So those are my goals for tonight. Women's lacrosse. We are our own unique sport. We don't necessarily, as athletes, as coaches in this community, want to wear more equipment. We don't really want to play with box sticks. We do have unique sticks with shallow pockets that we'll talk about. Our version of the game is incredibly fast-paced and very highly skilled. And I think that comes from the design of our sticks, that comes from the nature of the defensive play in our game. And while our sport is similar to basketball, particularly from a defensive standpoint and on how our field lines are kind of set up, officiating our game and the rules of our game are kind of like a blend between basketball and soccer combined. And while there's definitely room for change over the last number of years, if you've been involved in the OWFL community post-pandemic, there's been a bunch of rule changes as World Lacrosse looks to harmonize rules across men's field, sixes, box lacrosse. We're not immune to that in the OWFL. But generally speaking, we as athletes who have been involved in the game for a long time, coaches, we like it this way, and we're excited to see the game hit these new levels as these athletes through the OWFL, particularly in Canada, really start to bloom and become incredibly talented lacrosse players. So, in the OWFL, our mandate is to provide opportunities for girls and women of all ages to participate in women's field lacrosse across Ontario. We are currently responsible for running all of the rep women's field lacrosse programming in the province of Ontario for women's field. This would be where local clubs compete against each other and work towards a provincial championship at the end of every season. We currently offer U9, U11, U13, U15, U19, and a Jewel, which is our U19 Elite program. So there's a relegation system to get in and out of Jewel, which is kind of a really exciting element that we've adopted. And over the last couple of years since we introduced the Jewel League, it's been really cool to see who's in and who's out every season. The OWFL is also responsible for organizing the women's lacrosse component of the Ontario Summer Games tournament. So it's held biannually. It's going to be happening this summer in the first weekend in August at Laurier. The Kitchener-Waterloo is, or Waterloo Region's the host for Ontario Summer Games, and I think all the games are going to be at Laurier this year for women's field, which is super exciting. Great, my alma mater, so I'm a little biased, but great lacrosse hotspot. Yeah, so that's a little bit about what the OWFL does and offers. So tonight's call will not all be about officials, officials, officials. That is my main perspective. But again, as I mentioned, I was a goalie growing up. So I've watched a lot of really great lacrosse in my life on the field with a lot of really talented athletes. I've also, as a coach in the private sector with Team Ontario, had an opportunity to work with athletes at a higher level from a coaching perspective. So I'm going to try and adopt those perspectives into tonight's presentation as well. But I do think it's important to understand where our officials are coming from and what our general goals are. Because women's lacrosse is a sport that, dads didn't grow up playing. A lot of moms may not have grown up playing, parents may not have grown up playing. So it is different, it is unique, even if you grew up playing other versions of the game of lacrosse. So in women's lacrosse, in my opinion, officials play an important role in keeping play safe and allowing players to perform to their maximum ability. Fouls in our game are frequent, particularly compared to something like box lacrosse. We have way more fouls in a game. And something that I think is important to instill in our younger athletes, or as athletes coming through U13, U15, and U19 levels of play, is that they are going to commit fouls. Not all of our fouls involve a time served component where you have to leave the field and go sit in the penalty box. We don't do that for the majority of our fouls. And so the way that the women's game has adapted is that if I commit a foul, the best way for me to move on is to try and find a way to move on quickly. And getting bogged down in the fact that I committed a foul is actually going to hold me back from supporting my team. So if we can teach athletes that, particularly the more minor fouls that we'll kind of chat about tonight, if it happens, move on. That's going to be really important for them to be able to redefend, get back in a good position. So fouls are frequent. They can happen on and off ball. And like in soccer or in sixes lacrosse, dangerous or unsportsmanlike fouls can be carded. And in those scenarios, we are going to send a player off the field for 2 minutes or 10 minutes, depending on the severity of that dangerous or unsportsmanlike foul. So that's just a brief overview of what our foul system kind of looks like. And Sometimes I like to use Charlie Kelly as the guide into my psyche when it comes to trying to explain women's lacrosse. I can often feel this way, like things are super interconnected from an international level down to what we're doing here in the OWFL. Like things on a really high scale are impacting things on a domestic scale. Like the rules change, like what they do in the US is different. It can be a little complicated, so we hope that tonight's presentation can help to maybe mediate some of those questions or comments that come up throughout the course of the year that I hear all the time from families around the field. So, what types of women's lacrosse are there? Because we know there are different versions of the game. There's box lacrosse, which is men and women use the same rule book, men's field lacrosse, women's field lacrosse, and now we've got the sixes game, which is Olympic bound in 2028, which is super exciting. The qualifier tournament for that Olympic Games for North American teams and South American teams is actually happening in Oshawa this fall. So super exciting for our women's field lacrosse community to see our women's field lacrosse athletes participating now in that sixes Olympic qualifier. But when we're talking specifically about the women's field game, so the 10v10, the bigger field, that version of the game, we are governed by World Lacrosse, and we use the World Lacrosse rulebook as our rulebook here in Ontario, particularly at the U13 and up levels where we're playing quote unquote real lacrosse. What we consider real lacrosse is the World Lacrosse version of the game. Lacrosse Canada adopts those rules, the OLA adopts those rules, and we, as the Ontario Lacrosse Association's women's component, adopt those rules. And then we implement development oriented rules from U9 and U13 and from U9 through U13 levels of play. But as athletes get older, as they become more coordinated, more body conscious, more physical, then we are able to remove modifications and allow them to play or permit them to play our game as it should is and is intended to be played. So a lot of modifications at U9, U11. It's a big jump in our game right now to go as a major in U11 to a minor in U13. It's something that the league is looking into and maybe considering making changes in the future. But for now, hopefully tonight's presentation can help make that jump. Um, Also, what we do for World Lacrosse, everybody in the US does something different. So in the US, they have distinct rule books that are all governed by USA Lacrosse, but distinct rule books for youth lacrosse. Tournaments that you go to with a travel team will have very specific tournament rules. US High School, which is a huge network of teams across the country. They have their own rule book and own rules. The NCAA has its own rule book and its own rules and rules committees. And then now you've got the Women's Lacrosse League, this Pro Sixes League. It's also this summer going to have its first Tens League, which is, their equivalent of our version of women's field lacrosse. And we've had, I think, three Canadians drafted into that league, which is huge because there's not a ton of athletes in that four-team league. So Canada has a presence, super exciting. All of those athletes coming out of, or most of those athletes coming out of Ontario, if not all of them, super exciting. They all have an OWFL background to some capacity, with one exception, who came up through the men's game. But the WL, all of these different US groups all have a different rule book. So it can be really frustrating for parents of kids playing on travel teams or playing Team Ontario to go down to those US tournaments and see, well, these guys are doing something totally different. Hopefully down the road, US and World Lacrosse start to like align, but for now, know that they're using different rules. So if that's your gateway into this, we're going to be looking at something a little bit different for Ontario this summer. And then there's also different variations played around the world. Australia has its own rule modifications. The UK has their own rule modifications. So things can change from country to country. But for us here in Ontario, we're worried about modifying the World Lacrosse rulebook only from a development standpoint. We play on the same field at U13 as our Canadian athletes are going to be playing on in Japan at the World Championships this summer. It is a full 100-meter by 60-meter field. It has our full traditional field markings. So there's those semicircles in either attacking end, and then the kind of weird, we call them the fan lines on the inside, in addition to our goal circles. But this, again, the same version of the field being used from U13, U15, U19, Jewel, up right through to the University League here in Canada and beyond into World Cups. So that's the field that we're going to be using. So that's the first big transition piece that's like a big jump for U11s going to U13 is we're transitioning from the small 74 meter by 35 meter field to the 100 by 60 meter field. That also means that the number of players and those types of things are going to change and increase, which we will talk about. Just very briefly, I just want to highlight what some of the field lines are called. I think if there's any coaches listening in, it can be important to identify these for our athletes so that we can contextualize the field and help them understand where they need to be going. If I say to an athlete, get to the elbow, and they don't know what I mean by the elbow, that's limiting. If I say to an athlete, I need you to go to the dot, as a coach or as a player, it's very helpful to know what I'm talking about when I say those things because they are specific to the women's game. Some things are not specific, like we've got our sidelines, we have our end lines, we have a shared substitution area, U9 all the way up through Jewel. But this is taken from men's field and from sixes, so very similar. Both teams can substitute anywhere between those two pylons. And substitutions can happen throughout the entire course of the game. There's very few instances where an athlete isn't permitted to substitute, and we substitute on the fly. We also have a center line. This is where our draws take place. Our draws in women's field happen in the air above hip level, and we hold our sticks back to back and go up and away from there, as opposed to in boxer and men's field when the guys and women playing box have gloves on and get down on the ground and are fighting for a ball on the ground. So we do ours above the hip level, and that takes place here in the center circle. Um, we also have that center circle. We use the same one as soccer, so it's a big 9 meter radius center circle. The other change for athletes coming through from U11 to U13 is that we've now got two restraining lines. Restraining lines are used to dictate onside and offside. You can only have a certain number of players below a restraining line. And for us, it's going to be 6v6 plus a goalkeeper on the defensive team. These restraining lines, this midfield area, new for those athletes moving up, just a result of having the bigger field space. And then let's take a look at some of the more women-specific field line names. So we have three, or let me rephrase. The marking areas are areas around the goal where a lot of penalties are administered. All of these lines are about setting up penalties. And all three of these spaces that are color coded here have a distinct name and are used in different ways to administer different penalties of varying degrees of severity. So on the left, we've got this big 15-meter marking area. It's this big semicircle. This line on the outside, that's where we're going to set up minor penalties. So low stakes, but that's what that line is used for. If we go closer in, we also have this blue semicircle. This is called the 11-meter marking area. If somebody commits a major foul, a more serious foul, what's going to happen is we're going to give the person who was fouled a free shot from one of these hash marks. And everybody is going to clear out of that 11-meter marking area space in blue. So we clear that whole semicircle area. And when I say free shot, it's not exactly like basketball where the shooter's not being challenged. Once the whistle goes to restart play, some players will shoot from that hash mark, some players will drive in. Play is live at the whistle, so defenders can defend on those situations and scenarios. And then within the 11-meter marking area, we have the 11-meter fan. And the 11-meter fan is our equivalent of the key in basketball. It, like the key, is used to define an area where defense are not allowed to just hang out indefinitely. We need to keep the 11-meter fan generally clear. Um, so that people are not in the way of a shot or dangerously gumming up that space between the shooter and the goal. So we have a foul called 3 seconds, and the 11-meter fan is used to demarcate where defenders are allowed to stand or where they're not allowed to stand. We'll come back to that one towards the end of the presentation tonight. For the sake of tonight, it's just important to know that they are distinctly labeled. Hash marks too are named so that if a player commits a foul and I as the official am trying to get them to set up quickly so we can keep the game rolling, I'll say 14 blue center hash. It's important for them to know what hash I'm talking about because there are seven. So the center hash is the one in the middle. That's the easy one. From there, we label them first, second, and third. The third hash is also sometimes referred to as the hanging hash. It's the one kind of hanging on the outside of the fan. And we only use that hash for setup. So we only set the ball up on the inside five hashes, and the outside third hashes. Those are just for administering. We had put defenders there so defenders can run in and play defense off the whistle. We also have a space called the corner where the 15-meter marking area line meets what we call the goal line extended, this flat straight line and from corner to corner. We set up all of our goal circle violations there when the defensive team commits a goal circle violation. And then down here in the end, we have dots. The dots are used to administer penalties that occur in this clear space below the goal. So if a penalty happens in here, it's going to get set up on the dot. If a penalty happens in this area to the right of the goal, below the goal, it's going to get set up on this dot. So all of these lines, which seem kind of complicated, are literally just there to help us set up penalties. And then finally, we have what we call the advantage flag area. In the US, it's often called the critical scoring area or the CSA. We call it the advantage flag area or the AFA. This space includes the 15-meter marking area, the goal circle, and the advantage flag area below the goal line extended. So this space below the goal line. In that space, those are where, starting at U13, you're really going to see your officials using their yellow flags that they carry around. So during the women's field game, if you're familiar with men's field, they have an officiating system called play on. We have ours, which is called advantage. So if I see a player driving to goal and they get fouled, but if I blew my whistle, I'd be taking away an opportunity from them to take a shot and potentially score. In that scenario, I'm going to do what we do in hockey, what we do in sixes. And as the official, I'm going to put my hand up and I'm going to take that yellow flag with me. I'm going to say flag. And that's a signal to everybody on the field that I, as the official, have witnessed a foul. I can only do that on major dangerous fouls within this space, but it allows the attacking team to continue to goal. If they don't get a good shot off, I'm going to give them a free position on the nearest hash mark to where they were fouled. So it's just a little bit of a hold and a delay on administering a penalty to permit the attacking team to continue to go to goal. That's the gist of this space. This is also for our younger divisions where they were allowed to start making physical body-to-body contact. We are allowed to do that anywhere on the field when we play real lacrosse. So this space for U13 and up is about introducing that advantage flag and the idea that the whistle might not sound automatically or immediately if a foul is committed, if the official thinks it's actually more advantageous for the team going to goal to go to goal. So we want to not call back goals and not stop shooting opportunities when we can. And so why? Just before we jump into the actual rules, the day-to-day, why are there so many variations? Why are there so many rule changes? Why do we keep doing this to ourselves? My answer to all of these questions is really just that our sport is growing. Our sport is still finding its identity and growing massively on a world stage. I believe that in addition to pickleball and flag football, we're one of the largest growing sports across North America, which is super exciting. World Lacrosse is making big efforts to harmonize the women's game with men's field, with box, and now with sixes, so that there's fewer kind of like small nominal differences between each of those sectors. somebody who, grew up playing men's field, played the NLL, comes to women's field and is like, I don't know what you guys are doing. Why do you have even something as simple as our substitution area? We had two separate ones. Now we've got a shared one. Those types of changes have been coming down the line since the pandemic. We're also trying to, every time we redo the rule book, simplify the rules, make the game more spectator friendly, and we do all of that while trying to bear player safety in mind. I personally think that we're pretty close to what the final version of women's lacrosse is going to be like. And then hopefully we're like soccer and we just leave things alone forever. But there's definitely some growing pains. We understand that these can be a little alienating to new families in the OWFL, but we just ask you to bear with us. This is a really phenomenal game. The women who are coaching your kids that have been around the sport for a long time are here for a reason, and we're really happy to share this with your families. So let's talk about how lacrosse actually makes me feel most of the time, and it is this way. Super excited. I'm so happy that it's almost May, that we're almost back into our season. I'm exhausted from running clinics every night, but it's super fun and I love talking about lacrosse. So let's jump into it. General overview of U13 and up of real lacrosse. So if you were a involved in the OWFL at U9 and U11, you went from using a pink ball to using a yellow ball. So that soft ball to the hard rubber ball. Now we use that hard rubber ball throughout levels of play. We play with four quarters. In the OWFL, U13 uses, oh, actually, I should clarify that. U13 is on 10-minute quarters because their games are played on Sundays. They're in the same length of the game slot as U9, U11. So U13 is actually 10-minute quarters, and U15, U19 are 12 and a half minute quarters. I will correct that before I share this out. At all of these levels, we use draws in the air to start each quarter. We also do draws after every goal. So whereas U9, U11 plays kind of like sixes, where the goalie is responsible for clearing the ball out after every single goal, we are going to go back to the center and administer a draw after every goal is scored. We play 10 players total, so that's why women's field is sometimes called tens instead of sixes. But we, generally speaking, play six attackers versus seven defenders. One of those seven defenders is generally the goalie. We have to hold three players behind or above the restraining lines. And attack and defense are going to be played very similarly to basketball. So you starting at U13 are going to see a ton of pretty talented athletes start to run a zone defense instead of always being person to person. The jump from U11 to U13 for lacrosse IQ is pretty incredible. So we'll see person to person defense, man to man defense. We'll see zone defense. We have a scoring area like the key in basketball. We talked about our 11-meter fan. So attack and defense are very similar. Body positioning, getting in front of the ball, those types of things very similar to basketball. Player equipment. So what are you required to wear or required to have in order to step onto the field? For players, so not goalies, we'll talk about goalies separately. Players have to wear a mouth guard that covers all of their upper teeth. It can be any color, so don't stress about that. The OLA also mandates that all of our athletes wear goggles. So I'll show you what goggles look like. This is the OLA's document they had put out when goggles were mandated. Um, on the top, we have a picture of certified goggles. STX makes them, Gate makes them, lots of companies make them. Your local lacrosse shop will be able to supply them, and your local club will have a list of suppliers in the area that can provide equipment or sell equipment. So these are mandatory. The only exception in the OWFL for somebody to not have to wear these goggles is if they're wearing sport goggles. So they're like prescription goggles with the band around the back of the head. If someone is just wearing regular glasses, they do have to wear goggles on top of their glasses. But these are otherwise required. This is a picture of a helmet. These helmets are built in the US. They're currently not legal in international play. They're not approved for World Lacrosse play. So these are not currently permitted in the OWFL. Even though they have the goggles built in, it doesn't matter. We can't currently wear these in the OWFL. So mouthguard, goggles must be worn. Athletes wear running shoes, turf shoes, cleats, no metal bottoms, please. Depending on the playing surface and player preference, it's really up to them. We do suggest that you have both in case the surface that you're playing on is turf or grass or muck or who knows. Um, players may also wear close-fitting player gloves, not a hockey glove, but more like a warmth glove. We see this more in like our OUA season in the fall. Some players will wear like medical gloves because they actually keep your hands a little bit warmer. But in the OWFL, it's going to be very hot this summer, as every summer has been for the last couple of years. So we don't really see a ton of gloves, but you could wear tight-fitting gloves. And then sticks. Obviously, the most distinctive part of our game is the stick. Sticks and pockets must be legal for women's lacrosse. So if you have a box stick, you may not use the box stick in women's field lacrosse. We have distinct sticks that are designed specifically for our game. Because our athletes don't wear as much equipment as we do in box or in men's field, our sticks are designed differently so that it's easier to check the ball out of the stick. The common brands that produce sticks for box and for men's field also produce sticks for women's field. This is an example of an STX stick that I've got here. And the main key difference is that the depth of our pocket is much more shallow compared to those men's lacrosse or box sticks. Um, Ask the vendors where you're buying sticks from. You know, is this a women's lacrosse stick? They should be able to answer that question. Otherwise, you're welcome to send me emails or send your club head emails if you have questions about equipment specifically. And in terms of how to keep your stick legal, the number one thing that we're concerned with in women's lacrosse is the depth of that pocket. So, yes, we have a stick designed for our game, but we don't necessarily want it to become so baggy that you might as well be using a box stick that's impossible to check the ball out of it. So, what we're looking for as officials is that the ball remains visible above the sidewall of the stick from scoop down to the ball stop. So, I'm going to drop the ball in a stick and I'm going to make sure that the ball is perfectly visible from one end of the stick all the way to the other. If it's visible, it's legal and your pocket isn't too deep. If it's illegal, there's usually going to be four strings. Those need to be pulled or tightened to try and fix and correct your pocket. On the right, you can see that the ball here is not visible. It's below the sidewall from the scoop down to the ball stop. Here at the crux of the stick, the ball is not visible. So this is an illegal pocket, and we would need the athlete to pull their strings to tighten their pocket to make this stick legal. If your stick is, if somebody requests that your stick gets checked, and it's legal and you just scored, that goal is not going to count. So it's very important for athletes to know what we're looking for here and understand what makes a stick illegal or legal, and then know how to correct it so that throughout the game they can keep an eye on their pocket and pull in those strings and keep it legal for play. Just a little bit of a visual comparison. So here's the women's field lacrosse stick on the left. You can see the ball sitting in that sweet spot. You can see the very shallow sidewall in the skate stick here, being held by one of our former OWFL athletes playing for Team Canada. This is Annabelle. And then on the right, we've got our men's field. This is actually from a sixes game, but they use the same box and men's field sticks in men's sixes as we use women's field sticks in women's sixes. But much deeper pocket, balls completely submerged below the sidewall. And so just a visual comparison there between those two sticks. Goalkeepers. At U13, we're going to start to see many more designated goalkeepers. At U9, U11, some programs tend to rotate through and, everybody tries a game. But for U13, you're going to definitely start to see athletes who are, I am a goal, identifying as a goalkeeper, and they are saying, I'm a goalie. Their equipment expectations are the same as U11. So here they are. Every goalie has to wear a mouth guard. Yes, they're wearing a helmet, but they are also still required to wear a mouth guard under their helmet. They have to wear a lacrosse specific helmet. It can't be a hockey helmet. It can't be a box player's helmet. It must be a field lacrosse helmet. And attached to that helmet has to be a dangling throat protector. Similar to what hockey goalies have to wear underneath their helmets, just to protect the gap between the top of the chest protector and your chin. We really want to make sure that those are there. If your team doesn't have one of those, you cannot play because, or you cannot allow your goalie to play without one. It's for their safety. We're using a hard rubber ball, so it's very important that that piece of equipment is being worn. Goalies have to wear a chest protector and they have to wear gloves that are padded. Goalie gloves are very similar to a hockey player's gloves, but in lacrosse, they're a little bit more mobile. They're not as stiff. And generally speaking, this 3 centimeter rule applies for all goalie equipment. So, with the exception of the helmet, all equipment being worn by a field lacrosse goaltender has to be within 3 centimeters of their body. So, if you look at some big pieces like box lacrosse, chest protector, hockey shoulder pads, these box leg protectors, those are all illegal for the women's game versus things that are legal for the women's game are all going to be a little bit more form fitting. Goalies are the seventh defender. They are encouraged to play outside the goal circle. They are encouraged to go for interceptions. They are encouraged to run the ball up the field if that's your team's game plan. I know that was a big piece of what I loved about being a goalie was kind of being unexpected and getting to rush and do those types of things. But my coaches let me do that. So listen to your coaches. In terms of my equipment, I wanted to wear equipment that I could be mobile in. So I wore shin pads to try and prevent the permanent bruises that I still have on my shins. But you can wear shin pads. You can wear soccer shin pads if you want something smaller. These padded pants, getting hit in the thigh, not comfortable. So do recommend the pants. And then here's a good look at those chest protectors. Not many goalies will wear protection on the arms. If they want to, it has to be within 3 centimeters of their body. And then there's that women's lacrosse and men's field lacrosse goalie stick. And here you get a good look at what that dangling throat protector looks like on this Cascade helmet here too. So this is what a goalie is generally wearing U13 and up. You can see here too, there's these very, very triangular and long extended box lacrosse goalie sticks. Those are not legal for play in women's. Rule resources. So for all the things that we're going to go through tonight, we're going to be talking about rules directly in the rule book. But if you're curious how the OWFL modifies that rule book, we have a whole bunch of resources posted to our officiating website. It's where I house all of this stuff. When in doubt, start there. And one of those resources that, generally speaking, coaches, families have found helpful transitioning from one age division to the next is our rule modification summary document. So I'll pull that up now. Actually, I'll show you how I get there. OWFL.org/officials. So here is the officiating page of our website. I can scroll down or go down to rules and modifications, and it's just posted right here. All of these red buttons are all linked to various rule related documents. So the OWFL rule modification summary chart highlights all of the modifications being used for U9, all the modifications being used for U11. You can see there's a lot of crossover between U9 and 11. There's actually only two differences between those two levels of play. And then once you bump up to U13, everything in white is real lacrosse. So you start to see, pardon me, that we are really not modifying things once we get to U13. Something that I will flag as a difference between the three divisions that we're talking about on tonight's call. U13 uses that 10-minute quarter. U15, U19 are using 12 and a halves. Once you bump up to Jewel, you're playing 15-minute quarters. We're not using a shot clock at any division of play up until Jewel. And then the only other difference between and so that is the only difference between U13, U15, and U19. There is a changed rule this year. We've actually eliminated a modification that we'll talk a little bit more about. U13 and U15 used to have a modification saying that you couldn't play defense with a fully horizontal stick. That is now not inherently a foul. Pushing with a horizontal stick is a foul. It always has been a foul. But now, if I'm making good, equal contact on an opponent with my fist, with my forearm, or with a horizontal stick, so long as I'm not cross-checking or extending and pushing, it is going to be considered legal. It's a modification that we've removed because the quality of defensive play at U13 and up has improved to the point that we didn't feel it was necessary anymore. We don't love those gotcha calls, and it always felt like it was a gotcha call. So for U13 and up, here's how we compare to other divisions. If you're a U11 family transitioning to U13, I highly recommend taking a look at this document. If you're a U19 athlete who maybe is hoping that their team makes it into Jewel this year in the qualifier, have a sense of what the rules are going to be like in your play-in tournament before the season starts, so that you're prepared, so that you can get excited about what's to come with Jewel. So that's the overview document. But right now, there's very few modifications between the rule book and what we're playing at U13, U15, U19, which is really exciting and really nice. When I started officiating and playing, there were no modifications. Um, we've gotten to the point by introducing younger levels of play that we felt we had to put in as a league some development stuff. So it's really nice to be transitioning to the point where athletes are just capable of playing this game without assistance. So that is our rule modification summary document. Uh, each of those divisions is then broken out. So there's specific documents for U13. Again, very short document compared to the one for U9 and U11. The U15 and U19 ones look very similar. And then if you're a coach, the only other resource that I'll truly flag for you on our officiating website is this document that I've put together called Common Questions from Coaches. How many timeouts do I get? When can I call them? Is jewelry allowed? The short answer is no. Can my players tape their jewelry? The short answer is no. How do I request a stick check against an opponent's stick that I feel might be illegal? Those very coaching specific questions I've thrown into a document, pulled out of the rule book and thrown into a separate document. Hopefully it's helpful, but I just like to flag for coaches that might be listening that it's there for you if you want it. So now it's time to talk rules. Um, there are turnovers in women's field lacrosse, and then there are fouls in women's field lacrosse. Turnovers could be something like a change of possession, a boundary ball, and we'll talk about a couple of other examples. But then we also have fouls. And as we've talked about the lines earlier tonight, we have distinct foul categories that based on the foul, where it occurs, who commits the foul, we're going to set things up in very specific places. So the number one factor as to like how is a foul going to get set up is what type of foul occurred. So we have restraining line fouls, which are our offside calls. We have goal circle violations, which are fouls around the goalkeeper and the goal circle and the goal itself. We then also have minor fouls, which are generally speaking about keeping the game fair. And then we have major fouls. And generally speaking, those are safety fouls. If you've seen somebody get carded in a women's lacrosse game, that's a subsection of the major foul category. And generally speaking, with some exceptions, fouls are served on the field by moving a player either 4 meters behind the person who was fouled or 4 meters to the side of the person who was fouled, depending on the type of foul, depending on where it happened on the field. Let's talk a little bit more about change of possession instances. So in the women's game, there's definitely a ton of turnovers because the ball goes out of bounds or a player in possession of the ball steps on the sideline or the end line. Stepping on the line means you're out. So it's not like in soccer where you can play on the line. Once you step on the line, once the ball crosses that sideline or end line, the ball is being turned over to the other team. However, women's lacrosse is really cool because when there is a shot taken, we encourage our athletes to chase after that loose ball to try and regain possession. So, on a boundary ball, you're gonna hear, sorry, on a shot, you're gonna hear the official yell, shot. That is to signify that the player who is closest to the ball, where and when it goes out of bounds, is gonna be the player who is awarded with the ball. And a lot of times that's going to be the attacking team because they tend to set up on the outside of all of those lines that we have painted on the field and outside of the attacking area. So sometimes an attacking team will shoot, miss the net, and then if they were closest when the ball went out of bounds, they'll get that ball right back. But it also means that we have scenarios where goalies and defensive players are hustling their butts off to try and gain possession of a ball. So every time a shot is taken, 50-50 chance. Super fun part of our attack and defensive play in the women's game. And then something that is new for this year is this stalemate loose ball scenario that I'm going to talk about in a little bit more detail. But overview, change of possession instances, when there's a change of direction or a change of possession, no one has to go 4 meters behind or 4 meters to the side because no foul was committed. So let's look at that final kind of change of possession instance. This is a modification that we've brought into all levels of play except for Jewel. Jewel just uses the rulebook with zero modifications. Um, Up until U19, however, we as an organization last year recognized that some rule changes that came down the pipeline from World Lacrosse had a really big impact on lower levels of play. So in women's field, we have an alternate possession rule. And that is something that we're going to try and adopt this year to correct some not great behavior that was occurring last year as a result of these rule changes. So if you've been around the women's field game for a while, you might be familiar with our empty stick checking rule or with our covering rule. So generally speaking, if the ball was on the ground, um, players always had to get nice and low and scoop through the ball or skirt to the dirt or whatever the teaching cue was, and they could never cover the ball, even for a split second, with any part of their stick. They also couldn't check somebody who was going for a loose ball. If they checked an empty stick, that was a foul. But these were fouls that were only in the women's game, and they were kind of very tick-tacky at a high level. So World Lacrosse got rid of them. But the unintended consequence of that is that at lower levels of domestic play, like U13, U15, U19, and the OWFL, if players are missing passes and the ball's on the ground a lot, we were starting to see like Timbits hockey style scrums. And the ball was there, stuck in the mud, or stuck between a bunch of players trying to pick it up, and things could become dangerous. So we wanted to address that, understanding that sixes doesn't have these rules and women's field is not going back to like readopting these rules. So we're trying to think forward. So in a scenario that has the potential on the ground to become dangerous, where too many players are too close together, they're not getting low, they're not running through their ground balls, an official may award alternate possession. Like in basketball, when two players are going for a jump ball and fighting back and forth for a ball between their arms, we can just award alternate possession. Tweet, alternate possession means whoever got awarded alternate possession at the captain's talk, they get the ball now. The next time alternate possession is used, the other team gets the ball. It literally just flips back and forth exactly as it does in basketball. Um, we are doing this in scenarios where we don't feel that play is safe or when it's taking forever for the ball to get picked up. We want to just keep playing the game. So there is a level of the officials are going to apply this with their own judgment. We'll see how it goes. We did some preseason U9 games over the past weekend with new officials, and it was actually being called pretty effectively and efficiently. So fingers crossed, I'm knocking on wood, but that is a new modification for all levels of play up until U19 that you'll see officials trying to adopt throughout the season this year. Try to keep the game flowing, try and get the ball off the ground a little bit faster, and avoid dangerous situations where the ball's on the ground. Onsides, offsides in women's lacrosse. So we're done with change of direction, change of possession. Let's get into our four foul categories. And that first one was restraining line violations or offsides. Very briefly, on the women's game, we're playing tens now. That means 9 runners and a goalie, usually. And this is a very typical setup for a tens offense. So in this example, the blue team's on attack. They've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 players on attack, set up 2 below the goal and 4 above the 15-meter marking area. That's a very standard attacking formation. You'll see that in the NCAA. You'll see it at World Cup. Players giving themselves lots of space to move and to drive in with speed towards the goal. The defense generally at U13 and up will start to set up instead of being very close and playing person to person as almost like you're immediately guarding somebody, the defense is going to start to sag. And you'll see them at these levels of play start to sag to the 11. So they're avoiding our fan, our key, so as to not get called in 3 seconds and like gumming up that space. But if you're outside of the fan or if you're on that 11-meter fan line, you're good. Your attacker has to come to you to get to the goal. So you'll see these blue attackers drive through, and you'll see these gold defenders pick up that person as they're cutting through, making contact on that attacker. And when I say contact, I mean physical contact. I can put my arm on somebody's arm. I can use my fist to make contact with somebody's arm. I can use my stick to direct somebody. Contact in our game is legal so long as it's 50-50. As soon as somebody takes away space or dangerously directs somebody out of their lane, that's when we look at contact fouls. But we've got our goalie in the goal circle, we've got 6 defenders, and then on both teams here, we've got 3 players from each team above the restraining line. Very standard setup in this scenario. At the far end of the field, we'd have the very lonely blue team's goalie. I'll just say very quickly about the restraining line. We have two. So teams can't be offside if the ball is in the midfield between the restraining lines. But if one of these teams were to violate the restraining line rule, that means that they have stepped on or over the line and become the either eighth defender or the seventh attacker. They're the extra player that shouldn't be in this offensive defensive area. What my suggestion as a coach would be to athletes coming up to this level of play is that these guys are allowed to reach over the line to play a loose ball either on the ground or in the air or to stick check somebody running by them, so long as they're following all of the other rules of play and doing those things safely. But I would suggest those athletes actually take a step off the restraining line so they have space to inch forward. A lot of athletes at this level will come in and they'll stand right toes on the line. As soon as they step on that line, they're offside. So have them stand a little bit back so they've got room to inch forward to lean into the play a little bit. On the line is offside. Over the line is offside. And the last thing I'll say about onsides, offsides is that defensive offsides can often be delayed. We talked about our flag and holding, making a call, advantaging a play if we see that it's to the attacking team's advantage to continue to run to goal. It's better than if I actually blew the whistle. On offsides, if the attack's driving a goal, I probably am not going to call a minor offside call. I'm going to wait to see what happens. Then, when it's safe to do so, as the official, I'll blow my whistle and we can administer the penalty. On an attacking offside, that whistle is going to be more immediate because we don't want the attacking team to score a goal, potentially score a goal while they're offside. So there is a difference in terms of how quickly officials will react to the offside, but that's intentional. We do that to not take away opportunities from the defensive team or from the attacking team. So let's get into our second foul category. That is goalies and goal circle violations. So this is Rule 17 in our rule book. And just a couple of general points. So for the defense, around the goal circle, in the goal circle, what are they allowed to do? What are they not allowed to do? Defense at all levels of play may move through the goal circle, but may not remain in the goal circle indefinitely. So if I'm a defender playing close defense on an attacker running by the goal circle, my feet can enter that circle, no problem, no foul, to continue to stick with that attacker. You'll also see defenders now in our game increasingly start to follow behind the goal, and they can run through the back of the goal to stay close to somebody that they're defending. So totally legal. Somebody who's not defending somebody very close can also move through the goal circle to get to where they need to go. It's not a problem, but they can't stay in there forever. If little Susie doesn't know what's going on and she's just standing in the goal circle, kind of picking flowers or picking her nose or whatever she's doing, that's going to be a 3-second violation. Defensive players can also, therefore, pick up a loose ball sitting in the goal circle. They can exit the goal circle in possession of the ball, just like the goalie can with the ball in their stick, no problem. Defenders can be checked if they're in possession of the ball inside their own goal circle. The goalie cannot. We'll talk a little bit more about that goaltender interference in a second. But that's the gist of what defense can do in the goal circle. Attacking players on the other side are also allowed to reach into the goal circle, but their feet and bodies may not enter the goal circle. If a ball is loose, it's not being trapped under the goalie's stick or it's not in the defender's stick, the attack can go for that ball. They can absolutely go to try and pick up that loose ball. If they step on the line, it's their violation. If they step into the goal circle, it's their violation. So long as they don't interfere with the goalkeeper, it's legal. Once the goalie or their defensive teammate has possession of the ball, and possession here means the ball is either in the goalie's stick or they've trapped the ball, they've smothered the ball inside the goal circle. So inside that diameter of that circle, they then have 5 seconds in which to clear the ball out of the circle. They can do that by walking the ball out in their stick. They can do that by passing to a teammate who's outside of the goal circle. They can do that by running out of the goal circle. So once the possession has started, you're going to see officials counting to 5. They're going to use a nice high arm signal and count audibly. They're going to count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. If the official says 5 and the ball is still in the goalie's stick inside the goal circle or still trapped underneath their stick at the 5 second counter, that's a violation. 5 seconds isn't a long time. It's not a super short amount of time. It's a good amount of time to get the ball out. We want the game to progress forward. So we have to get rid of the ball before that 5 second counter. And then finally, goalies can only cover or smother the ball when it's inside. So very often the ball might be sitting, a foot outside the goal circle line. The goalie can't trap it there if somebody from the other team is trying to pick it up. That's called withholding. And we'll talk about the withholding rule when we get to minor fouls. The goalie is considered inside the goal circle when their feet are on or inside the line. If they're straddling the line, 1 foot in, 1 foot out, they are in. So they're not considered out of that 5 second danger until both of their feet exit the goal circle. And then once the goalie leaves the goal circle with the ball, they can only return into the goal circle in possession of the ball once they've been played. This is happening less frequently. I think this might be a rule that changes in the future, but we'll see what happens. For now, being played means that the goalie gets stick checked. So they have the ball in their stick and somebody checks them. Usually they keep the ball because their pocket is much deeper. It's much harder to check the ball out of the goalie's stick. So if they get checked, they can roll the ball into their goal circle and follow it in. If they pass to a teammate, receive the pass back, then they could also roll the ball into the back of their net and follow it in. They're not allowed to just walk over the line. Again, hopefully that changes in the future because that's a silly rule. But they can toss it on the back and chase after it. Not as recommended these days because the attack's allowed to go for a loose ball and reach inside to try and pick it up. But if they feel it's safe to do so, they could do that. These rules mean that a goalie standing in the goal circle can pass to a teammate who can pass back to them. 5 second count starts. They pass back to that teammate, passes back to the goalie, 5 second count starts. So we don't have a limit on how many 5 second possessions a team can have in a row. And finally, goalkeepers may leave the goal circle at any time because there are no passing rules in U13 and above. There's the only consequence of leaving the goal circle is that your net is empty. That's it. So unlike at U9, U11, where there's some specifications around this, here, if the goalie leaves, it doesn't change anything other than there's an open net. Let's get into that third foul category. So we're talking minor fouls. Here, I'll just highlight that if you're looking through this slide deck after the fact, when it gets sent out, anywhere you see one of these video icons, I have some links in the presenter notes at the bottom of the presentation. So I'll just click on one so you can kind of see what I'm talking about. That will link directly to our YouTube page where I've put together a number of clips that I've stolen from the internet and from Instagram to hopefully try and help explain common rules. They're mostly major fouls, but empty and held cross checks is a couple of minor fouls that I've explained through this video. So feel free to check those out if you're curious. My emphasis tonight is going to be on a couple of major fouls. We won't watch the videos together, but I will send out a list of all of the videos. They're on our OWFL officiating channel. Do feel free to check them out anytime. Talking about minor fouls, these are the fouls where if something happens and a minor foul is committed, the person who committed the foul is going to be moved 4 meters to the side of the player who they fouled. These are the most common minor fouls, and to be honest, even some of these don't happen all that often. So we have this general category we call illegal procedure, and all of the following fouls can count as an illegal procedure minor foul. So a player has illegal equipment. Which could mean not wearing a mouth guard. It could mean they have taped jewelry and they shouldn't. Those are all examples of illegal equipment. The no mouth guard is probably the most common. Either it's in somebody's sock or it's hanging out of the side of their mouth. Those are fouls. You need to wear your equipment correctly. Somebody who is at the draw and responsible for taking the draw for their team and draws illegally. We won't get into the specifics on that tonight. There's 1,001 things you could do illegally at the draw. Generally speaking, we get set. We don't move once the official says ready, and on the whistle, we go up and away. If you're doing those things, you'll be set up for success. But if you don't do those things, it will be your illegal draw foul. Illegal substitution. If there's too many players on the field, if a team substitutes way too early at that shared sub box, it always needs to be 1-for-1. But that is a potential minor foul. Players may not throw their stick. That is a minor foul. If you were to throw your stick at somebody, I would not consider that minor. I would consider that pretty major. But we're talking about throwing your stick to try and prevent the ball from going out of bounds or to try and get an interception. Handball. Only goalies are allowed to touch the ball with their hands, and they can only do it inside the goal circle. But if a player ever thumbs the ball inside their stick or touches the ball with their hand for some reason, that's a foul. I will say that body balls are not a foul anymore. So I am legally allowed to kick the ball to a teammate. I can play it off my shoulder and then pick it up in the air. I can kick it to free space and go after it myself. Those are all legal now. But I may not kick the ball into the net. That's the only time that it wouldn't be a foul. It just would be no goal. You may not kick the ball into the opponent's net to try and score a goal. The other minor foul that I'll flag here is that we're introducing stick checking. That's going to be a huge part of what we talk about moving forward. This is the first time as a U13 minor aged athlete that you're allowed to stick check legally in the women's game. Held stick checks are a foul. So if we consider what makes a foul illegal, we can start to infer what makes a foul legal. So the first thing we'll talk about is held stick checks. These are minor. When a player stick checks somebody, they need to make sure that they do not hold the stick of their opponent down forcefully with their stick check. So checks have to be down and they have to come back up. If you check someone's stick and hold it down, you're stopping them from play. You're potentially tripping them up a little bit. That is a minor foul. So definitely a minor foul. Withholding the ball is another very common minor foul. This used to be covering, and now it's changed to the sixes version of the rule, which makes it easier to pick up the ball. There's less restrictions on covering, but it still doesn't mean that you can just like throw yourself on top of the ball. That's withholding. You are literally withholding the ball from your opponents or from your own teammates to try and pick it up. So the withholding the ball rule says if an opponent is able to make a legal play on the ball, so if anyone is within a stick length of me, a player must not trap a loose ball on the ground with their stick longer than is necessary to control the ball and pick it up in one continuous motion. Raking the ball is now permitted. It wasn't permitted before. As of last year, it is now permitted. Raking meaning I put the scoop of my stick on the ball, I quickly pull my stick back, and then I scoop through. So raking is now legal. A player must not withhold the ball from play with any part of their body. So if I get tripped up on my own stick and fall on top of the ball and I'm sitting on top of the ball, that is my foul. We're trying to protect you from that not happening. But you can't lie on top of the ball to try and kill time towards the end of a quarter or something like that. A player must also not withhold the ball from play in any other manner. And again, the exception is the goalie may trap the ball. I think trap or smother are kind of the key words to think about when we're talking about withholding. But they can only do so inside the goal circle. And then they have 5 seconds to clear the ball from the goal circle. So that's our withholding the ball rule. And then more stick checking stuff. So there are a couple of other minor stick checking fouls. And the one that we'll talk about next is the empty stick check. So this rule recently changed. Last year was the first year we had a new version of this rule. Traditionally, anybody who was going for a ball and didn't have possession of the ball, you could not stick check them. Now the rule says this: a player must not check an opponent's empty stick while the opponent is trying to gain possession of the ball in the air. This rule only applies when an opponent is attempting to receive a pass. So, anybody going for a loose ground ball, if I don't have possession of the ball, you can now legally check them, so long as the stick check isn't held. And then all the other components that we're going to look at that make a legal stick check. Incidental contact between sticks while playing for a ball on the ground or in the air is legal. But what this foul means is that it really has to be I'm asking for a pass from one of my teammates, and an opponent checks my stick out of the way to try and stop me from getting that pass. That is an empty stick check. Otherwise, all of that low ground ball kind of like tic tac stuff is now legal. You cannot dangerously check somebody even though they're because their stick is on the ground or because they're going for a ground ball or for a loose ball. Um, so this has been a bit of a change, and that's why we have that alternate possession rule. We'll see how it goes. But I also think this is year two of this new rule change. So I think it's going to be much better in terms of like athlete retention of the change, and how gameplay is affected by it. So the other thing I'll flag here is that this rule only applies when an opponent is attempting to receive a pass. So that means that if I'm one of the midfielders playing around the center draw circle, and on the whistle, I'm allowed to run into the circle and try and gain possession of the ball once it goes up into the air. I could technically bat somebody's stick out of the way to try and go for that high ball because it wasn't a pass. It's a draw, it's a ball coming high off the draw. Again, so long as it's done and not holding somebody's stick down or any of the other things that make a stick check illegal that we're going to talk about, it would be fine to do that now. Major fouls. Um, so now let's get into the actual gritty stuff. These are fouls that are generally speaking administered instead of 4 meters to the side. We're going to make it a little bit more severe because the foul is more severe, and the person who commits the foul is going to move 4 meters behind the ball carrier or the person entitled to the ball. There's two very broad subcategories of major fouls. One is a group of fouls that are all oriented around displacement. The most common one is called illegal contact. You might as well call it pushing. Pushing is not legal in women's lacrosse. The foul signal is one hand up, one hand down, and an extension, like a cross-checking motion. We're going to call that if we see somebody pushing with their butt and trying to box somebody out and they push or displace somebody. And you're going to see that same signal if I use my stick to actually cross-check somebody. Cross-checking sounds a little bit more dangerous. It is. We would then tack on a card on top of that. Defensive contact is permitted anywhere on the field at this level of play, but displacing an opponent is a major foul, period. The other foul category is unsafe checking. And most unsafe checking is going to get called dangerous check. So that's the name of the foul. the official would put their arm out and they would do a checking motion kind of across their lower arm. Stick checking is legal starting at U13 and above. So the transition from U11 to U13, this is the other very big change. We want to make sure that we understand how to check legally and your teams have a sense of how to check legally in order to prevent unsafe situations around stick checking. Before we get into stick checking, I do want to just kind of flag again that the horizontal modification has been removed. So previously, no horizontal stick to body contact was permitted. Now you can legally make horizontal stick to body contact if you're the defensive player, so long as you are not pushing. If you're pushing, we're going to call that illegal contact. But let's get into the stuff that we really care about. This is a big point of emphasis for officials on U13 games and U15 games in particular this year. The league, the club heads have asked us to make this a point of emphasis. We were going to be trying to implement as consistent officiating as we can around these things. So the dangerous check rule says a player must not roughly or recklessly check an opponent's stick. That's the bottom line here. If something is rough or reckless, I know that's kind of up to interpretation, but those are going to be fouls. What's the opposite of that that would make a stick check legal? Controlled and contained. So something that is nice and controlled. Stick check comes down, stick check comes up once it makes contact. Um, we're looking for something, we're looking for athletes to demonstrate control with a stick check. It's worth saying that not all upwards checks are fouls. Not all big checks are fouls, particularly by the time, actually, to be honest, at U13, the level of play is pretty incredible. You're going to see some really quality stick checking at U13, particularly as we get further into the season. But at U15 and at U19, you'll also see just some really quality stick checking. A yard sale, someone's stick goes flying. A big stick check is not necessarily a foul. A big stick check can be controlled. It can be contained. So what we're looking for is that sticks are not being checked in the following ways. We're not checking somebody in the sphere. The sphere meaning the space, if I'm the ball carrier, from my shoulders up to the top of my bun or whatever I've got going on for my hair. I need to keep sticks out of this space. We're trying to protect people's heads. We don't want to have to wear headgear in our game. So we want to keep this space, this sphere safe. So stick checks can't be into this space. That's a foul. They cannot be into your opponent's body. So increasingly in the NCAA, we're seeing a lot of defensive play where a defender is using their stick to get on the hands of the ball carrier, like you might in men's field. But in men's field, they're wearing gloves. It is not painful to get checked on the hands the way that it is painful to get checked on the hands in women's. So if somebody is checking into my body, like across my midriff, if somebody is getting on my hands or trying to like poke their stick into my body, that is a foul. Things need to be away from the head and the neck. So if I check down, my stick check then has to come up. I can't check down and come through my headspace. And a check that causes the ball to come towards the ball carrier. So I'm cradling and a stick check drives the ball or my stick into my own headspace. That's going to be a foul as well. The opposite of these things will be legal. So stick checks that come down and away from the sphere, those are legal. Stick checks that come down and away from the player's body, those are legal. Sticks that are away from the head and neck, generally more legal. A stick that causes the ball to fall away from the ball carrier, generally legal. And I will just kind of take a second to, I think, show some big stick checks examples that are legal. In the dangerous checks video, sorry, I'll turn the music off. It's catchy, but I listen to it all the time. I use this video right off the top in the title slide for this because this is the into the body one that's becoming much more prevalent, but is a foul. Even in the NCAA, this should be called and is not getting called. But we'll just watch that one more time. into the body, right onto the hands and into the tummy. So this video is about dangerous checks, but I just want to come towards the end and let's look at what legal stick checks might look like. Remember, big checks do not always equal a foul. So in this video, a really nice player in blue, beautiful down and away stick check. And then their teammate in blue picks up that loose ground ball. Really lovely example here. Here, down and away from the headspace of the ball carrier. Very controlled. You can see this player in white choosing when to attack the stick. They're holding their stick up and they choose the right moment to pounce. In this instance, the player in white goes for an interception and their stick goes towards the stick of the ball carrier, but it doesn't go into that player's body. It goes into the stick. And this final example is one of my favorites because it shows a big stick check. By big stick check, I mean high to low. But watch what this player's stick is going to do after it finishes coming down. She's going to demonstrate a ton of control by bringing that stick back up. The alternative would be big high all the way down low and it ending on the ground or the stick twirling back. And that's going to be something that we call a swipe. And we're going to look at that together after this example. But one more example, big stick check, yard sale stick check, stick goes flying down and away from the head just because it was big doesn't mean it was a foul. One last example here of a legal stick check. Checking from behind, legal, so long as it's away from the headspace. And player Smith here, big stick check, down and away. Down and away. It doesn't hold forever on the stick. It doesn't hold that stick down. It checks and then leaves. It might leave a little more downwards than some of the other ones, but to be that close to that attacker and to control their stick at that level, an absolutely lovely, beautiful stick check. We don't want to constantly, as officials, be penalizing the defense just because they are playing good defense. Like we shouldn't penalize them at all in those situations. So I like to show examples of what legal stick checks look like so we can see what we're trying to achieve at the highest levels of play. Swipes. So if that player for Johns Hopkins in one of those last videos there, big, beautiful stick check, high to low, and then showed control and a lack of recklessness, a total control of her stick by bringing it back up following the stick check, a swipe is the opposite. This is the rule that club heads have asked that we make an absolute priority. This is the number one carded foul at U13. At U15, it's this and checks to the head. So it's very important for us to keep those rules front of mind. But I want to try and work with U13, U15 organizations in particular this year on understanding what we are looking for when we call a swipe. So the rule says a player must not make a long sweeping motion with an extended arm from high to low across the body at their opponent with their stick, regardless of whether or not contact is made with an opponent's crosser body. So this is a super reckless, super uncontrolled stick check that might miss somebody entirely, but if it makes you go, oof, or if you might have killed her if you had made contact, this is what we're looking for with swipes. So let's take a look at a couple of video examples of what we're looking for with the swipes. Oh, I got it twice here. Sound is off. So player trailing from behind, big stick check, and you'll notice that 45 actually falls to the ground. The stick was lacking control in such a big way. This is a mandatory card when this foul occurs, meaning that if I see it as an official, I don't get to use my discretion. I have to stop the clock, award a card, and the player who committed this foul, even if they didn't make contact, they have to serve a 2-minute violation. Here's that video again. This is textbook. High to low, across the body, to the point where 45 is so out of control and reckless that they lose their footing. Also, I like this video because you see an example of an advantage situation. If the official had called the whistle, blown the whistle for the swipe the second the foul had occurred, red wouldn't have been able to shoot the ball. But because they held the whistle, they get the shot off, and it's a goal. Cards are still administered even if a goal is scored. It doesn't get wiped by the goal. Let's look at some more examples. This one is so very dangerous, and the player in yellow may not have known it happened. This is from the Athletes Unlimited Pro League that was running the last couple of years. High to low, across the body, stick swings down and away, does not come back up after the attempted check. And then maybe my favorite swipe video I've ever seen. Absolutely high to low, absolutely lacking control to the point where the stick on the left hits the ground before it bounces back up. If a stick check comes from high to low, makes contact with the ground, that almost every single time, I can't think of many examples where that would not be a swipe. We need to make sure that players are not trying to take anybody's head off with a stick check. Stick check should be small and controlled or big and controlled, but they need to be controlled. One more time. Actually, I think it cuts out before she just the tracking. It frightens me and terrifies me. So that's enough examples of swipes. But I think important to demonstrate what we're looking for when we call that foul. We are almost done, so thank you so much for bearing with me. We've got a couple of more major fouls to talk about and a couple of more small gameplay concepts to talk about. If you have to pop out, I totally understand. Otherwise, appreciate you sticking with me. Another major foul that is, I would say, key to women's field lacrosse. This is a rule that is not in any other sector. Sixes doesn't have this. They have a version of this, but it's not called consistently, and I don't think they know what they're doing with it. But we've got nothing like this in men's field. In men's field, defensive players are encouraged to soak shots and take shots off the body if they're defensive players. In box lacrosse, the same thing. In women's field lacrosse, we don't want to wear equipment. It's what makes our sport unique. We get to be faster, run up that field with more finesse by not wearing equipment, in my opinion. So our shooting space rule is about making sure defenders don't put themselves in a position where they are potentially going to get hit with a shot. The shooting space rule is in effect only when the team is in possession of the ball within the 15-meter marking area. If the ball is outside of the 15-meter marking area, we can't call shooting space. A defender, and the rule generally speaking, says that a defender must not block or guard the goal for the purpose of obstructing the lane between the shooter and the edges of the goal circle. So it's quite a wide space in which a defensive player should not be in that space on their own. If they're guarding somebody within that space, they're able to touch that attacker with their stick. They are not in shooting space. So we're talking about players gumming up the works, being in that space and just taking away a safe advantage for an attacking team to shoot and obstructing the lane between the ball and the edges of the goal circle. Obstructing the shooting space denies the attacking team the opportunity to shoot safely, point blank. And that's what this rule is about. At all levels, shooting space, a defender is not in shooting space, as I mentioned, if they're legally marking an opponent within a stick length or if they're standing below the goal line, because you can't block the goal if you're below the goal. So what does that look like? So we've got our 15-meter marking area space in our goal circle. These are all various shooters. This is the ball. And so you can see what the lane looks like. So if I look at this center lane, if the ball was right here and I'm just a defender posted right in this space and there's nobody within a stick length of me from the opposing team, I am in shooting space as soon as this ball and this shooter go to look to net and try and score. As soon as that shooter turns to me as the defender, as soon as that shooter turns the goal, we're looking for the officials to call that shooting space right away. Shooting space is an immediate whistle because it's a safety concern. So same thing if we look at one of the other shooting lanes. This one's very common. So let's say there's a free position set up on this second hash here. So this is the ball we're talking about. The reason why on our major fouls, if they get set up on a hash mark, we clear the entire semicircle all the way here, is so that a defensive player, if they run in, they have to really run in on the whistle to try and block that lane. We want to try and keep that defender safe. But if that defender were to run into that lane and this player is looking to the goal, they have the opportunity to shoot safely, other than someone's in their shooting lane, tweet, we're going to blow that shooting space whistle right away. So here are a couple of visual examples of exactly what that looks like. This is USA versus Team Canada from the World Championships in 2022 in Towson. And we have a player in white. There's nobody in their immediate vicinity that would make this shot dangerous. But if you look at the ball to the edge of the goal circle, there is, pardon me, absolutely a Team Canada defensive player who's gumming up the works, who is blocking or obstructing that shooting lane. If you watch this in the video, they actually don't call this. And it scares me every time I watch the video. She's lucky she didn't get pegged with the ball. But this defensive player is in shooting space. So as soon as this player in white turns to look at the goal, we should be blowing the whistle and signaling that shooting space violation right away. Another example, this time Team Canada has the ball. They are within that 15-meter marking area. They're actually standing on the 11-meter fan line, on the 11-meter marking area line, absolutely looking to shoot, otherwise able to shoot safely, except for this player in white who, like in the last example, is dead in the center of the shooting lane. In this video example, if you click into the link at the bottom of the video, you can see that this one does get called, which is great. But we want to call this defender as soon as the shooter looks to shoot in shooting space for their own safety and for their own protection. Because it's immediate, we want to teach our goalies to play to the ball, not to play to the whistle. And what do I mean by that? Because shooting space is immediate, there is an exception to the shooting space rule. If the whistle is blown for a shooting space violation between the moment the shot has been released and the moment a goal is scored, we're going to count that goal. So in this first example, the ball is shot, the official signals shooting space as quickly as they're able to, and the ball goes in the net. So long as it was not dangerously propelled, which means that the defenseman was hit with the ball, or their teammate was hit with the ball. But otherwise, if it's shot, whistle, goal, the goal is going to count. So you want to teach your goalies to play to the save and to play to the ball, not to the whistle. Shooting space is the only rule where this applies. Sometimes whistles come because we see dangerous play, and unfortunately, it might kill an attacking drive. Sometimes somebody gets a beautiful pass off, but they've been fouled, and the officials maybe are less experienced. They don't call the advantage. All possibilities. So we want to make sure that we are playing to the ball. But in this situation, that means that the goal or the save might come after the whistle. So the second scenario in shooting space exceptions is if the goalkeeper makes the save after the whistle. So in that scenario, if the goal counted, we also are going to let the save count. So in this one, shot happens and is immediately followed by the whistle for shooting space, but the goalie makes the save, we're going to restart play with the goalie. They don't need to face another shot, another free position, another penalty shot for, or not penalty shot, but free position for already having made that save. So we'll give them the ball. Same thing if the ball were to hit the post. We're going to restart play with the ball with the goalie. If the play was player shoots, whistle, and the ball misses the net, we're going to set up the free position and give the ball back to the shooter. Person who is in shooting space is going to go 4 meters behind. So that's the shooting space exception. This one's been around for 4 years now, I think. So players are getting more comfortable with it. Officials are getting more comfortable with it. These are split-second decisions, right? So tough to play, but nice to know that although I'm trying to do well by a player and keep them safe by calling shooting space, there are definitely scenarios where we've had to call back goals in the past. Now we don't have to do that, and that's really nice. And then the last big rule that I want to talk about is related, and we've referred to it throughout the call tonight. It's our 3-second violation. So it's totally tied to shooting spaces you're going to see. I'm actually going to use the same pictures to kind of demonstrate what I mean. But the 3-second rule essentially takes effect when the attacking team crosses the ball into the attacking end of the field over the restraining line. So it's in effect a lot. And it says a defender must not remain in the 11-meter fan for more than 3 seconds unless they are marking an opponent within a stick length. So they can't just be little Susie picking daisies in the middle of the fan. As we've learned with shooting space, it's dangerous for her to post up there without guarding somebody. A defender who is marking somebody standing directly behind the goal is exempt from 3 seconds. They're covering somebody below the goal, that's fine, but they're not exempt from shooting space. So just another one of those little exceptions to think about. So let's look at this scenario again in terms of 3 seconds. We've got two Canadian defenders up top focused on the ball. But this is really a 3v3 situation. We've got one, two, three Canadian defenders, and we've got one, two, three American attackers. What's happened to Canada in this situation is that they've got caught up on the ball and their defenders are split. This defender is split between covering somebody on the far side of the fan and somebody on the near low side of the fan. And so she's posted up in that space probably for 3 seconds or longer, waiting to see which way the ball is going to go. The whistle should have come for shooting space because somebody actually turned to look and went to shoot, and she was in that space. But as the official, I'm also wondering if she's dead in the center of the fan, how long has she been there? So we're looking at this from a shooting space perspective, but it's also possible that she's been in this space for 3 seconds. And by being in that space, she's taking away an opportunity for the shooter to uh, drive to goal safely. In this example, we have a very similar situation. This defenseman is technically responsible for this attacker out here. They checked into the fan to try and take away space momentarily, but as the official, I'm wondering how long have they been in there? Yes, they're in shooting space, but were they also potentially in 3 seconds? Shooting space usually takes precedent, but in this situation, are they within a stick length of everybody? Anybody? No. You can literally see her stick is extended and nobody is close to her. So if she was in there for 3 or more seconds, we're going to call or look to call 3 seconds as well. Cards. So those are the major fouls I wanted to cover tonight. I think it's just worth explaining how our card system works. So we have two cards that we use for players, for people on the bench. It could apply to a coach for a misconduct or a trainer for misconduct. It can also apply to any of the players on the field or on the bench. A yellow card is a 2-minute foul. If somebody receives their first yellow card of the game, it's a 2-minute violation. They have to leave the field. They can stand on their bench. We don't have a penalty area the way that they do in sixes or in men's field, but a yellow card is a 2-minute violation. The player leaves the field for 2 minutes and their team plays down a player for 2 minutes. It's not releasable if a goal is scored, like it is in hockey. In women's field, you have to serve the entire duration of your card always. Your team has to serve the entire duration of the card always. And a player is expelled from the game if they receive 2 yellow cards. So if you see an official show a yellow and a red card, it's not the official's choice to upgrade to 5-minute penalty from a 2-minute penalty. It just means that this is this player's second yellow. The red card indicates that the player is expelled. And when you show a yellow and a red together, it's automatically a 5-minute violation. The player may not return to the game. They may return in the following game, assuming they don't have any additional suspensions they have to serve. You get points for every card that you receive throughout the season. When you hit a certain point threshold, you might have to serve a 1-game suspension. For the purposes of in-game, first yellow card is a 2-minute violation. Second yellow card, the official is going to show a yellow and a red card. It's a 5-minute non-releasable card. And then we also have straight red cards. Those are an automatic 10-minute player down. That player who received the card is expelled from the game. Red cards are for pretty reprehensible play, swearing directly at an official or at an opponent, using incredibly dangerous, intent to injure, physical play. That's what red cards are for. They come with an automatic 1 game suspension, and your team has to play down for 10 minutes. So that's our general cards. Again, non-releasable. There's 4 cards that are mandatory. An official doesn't have a choice. If they see it, they must call it. Those are checks to the head, so checking somebody with your stick in their head. Intentional or not, it doesn't matter. You can't check people in the head. Swipe, which we're all now very familiar with. Dangerous follow through. Generally speaking, a dangerous follow through is I'm the shooter, I take my stick and I shoot, and my stick makes contact with somebody in front of me. We can't do that. It's not safe to be whipping our sticks and making contact with our opponents or with our teammates. So, dangerous follow through, automatic yellow card. And then a dangerous propel. A dangerous propel is often tied to shooting space, but it is about the a shooter's actions in that situation, not the defender's actions in that situation. I propel the ball, meaning I shoot or I pass the ball and it almost hits somebody or it hits somebody. If that player was in there of their own volition, that's gonna be that's absolutely my propel call. And we want to make sure that shooters know who's between them and the goal when they shoot. You can't just in our game, you are not entitled to shoot just because you have the ball. You have to make sure that you can do so safely. So that's the dangerous propel one. Officials can also upgrade any major foul to a card, misconduct, illegal contact. So that's probably the most common one where somebody commits a real big cross check. I'm looking for my officials to upgrade that illegal contact major foul to a yellow card. If a team has a breakdown foul, breakdown foul, breakdown foul, we call that a repeated major foul. Cards are meant to deter poor or dangerous behavior. If a team isn't learning that their play is unsafe, I'm showing you it's unsafe by giving you a card. That's when we're going to see this repeated major card come out. And then misconduct, unsportsmanlike behavior or play from anybody on the bench or on the field. So those are our cards. And then finally, as of last year, we've adopted a purple card. This is to address specifically negative spectator behavior. There's 3 levels here as well. An official can decide to give a warning where they stop the clock, turn, speak to the parents and ask them, or speak to the spectators and ask them to stop the poor behavior. There's also stop the clock, turn around, and award a purple card to somebody who is really bringing the negativity to the field that day. We did have a number of purple cards issued last year. We want to keep the field a positive environment for the young athletes, for our officials, for everybody involved. So we're hoping it doesn't happen all that often, but we're trying to protect those playing and enjoying the game by keeping things on the spectator side of the field fun and light and positive as well. And then the third instance is if I feel as an official that something really reprehensible has happened, if I would consider it a red card on the field, I'd probably also consider it a red card off the field. Generally, language is a real big concern. So we have had to expel spectators. This isn't here to be scary. We're not trying to intimidate anybody away from coming to enjoy their kids' game. We just want the sidelines to be a positive environment. We've taken this purple card system from volleyball. Um, your team identifies you. Your name goes on the game sheet as the spectator being ejected from the game, and your team has to serve a 2-minute violation. Refusing to acknowledge who you are or what team you support will ask you to leave. And generally speaking, the coaches are responsible for all of this. So they usually know who people are. That's the purple card policy. Again, not intended to deter anybody from enjoying the game, but we want to keep women's field lacrosse a safe space, a fun space. We don't generally have a lot of the issues with spectator behavior that are big in, unfortunately, the box community. We want to keep it that way. So this is us trying to do something to deter negative behavior from the sidelines. The final concept that I want to get into is our self-start rule. So we've talked a lot about whistles and penalty administration tonight, but we also have this thing in women's field lacrosse that's specific to our game called self-start. Generally speaking, the rule says that when a player is fouled outside of the advantage flag area, they may self-start, which means restarting the play on their own without waiting for a subsequent whistle. Um, they get fouled, they pick up the ball. The person who commits the foul still needs to start to go 4 meters to the side or 4 meters behind them. But as soon as they start to run, play is live. And the player who fouled no longer needs to keep going four behind. They can continue to move and rejoin the play. The only instances in the game where you're not allowed to self-start are the following four. If the clock is stopped for a timeout, we need a whistle to restart play after the timeout to restart the clock. If there's an illegal draw, and that's because often the ball goes pretty far, we need to bring the ball back and correct things. If a team is offside, somebody can't restart with a self start because we need to correct the offside before we restart play. And then any foul of the four foul categories inside the advantage flag area, that big marking area around the goal, any foul in there has to go to a specific spot. So we do not permit for self start within those spaces. In those four instances, players have to wait for a whistle before the play begins again. All boundary balls at all times, anywhere on the field, are always a self start. Whichever player is entitled to the ball because they're closest to the ball and they're on the team that's getting the ball back, they come in 2 meters and they self start every single time, even in stop time, which for U13 is in the last 30 seconds of each quarter. And for U15, U19, it's 30 seconds of the first three quarters and 2 minutes of the fourth quarter. Even between the dots inside the advantage flag area, they can self start. All boundary balls. Um, so that's it. That's all I wanted to go through tonight. It's a lot of content. I really appreciate you guys who stuck with me throughout the call tonight. I really appreciate the people watching this recording after the fact. What were our goals for tonight? We were looking to provide a brief overview of the game of women's field lacrosse. We were looking to provide an overview, very brief, of the OWFL and our programming. I wanted to, oh, this slide needs to be corrected. I wanted to introduce U13, U15, and 19 rules and the modifications, few as they are, that are specific to this level. I wanted to build avenues for spectators and coaches to better inform themselves and contribute to a positive environment for our athletes and our officials. And I want to share my love of the game with our OWFL community. It's been a Women's lacrosse has been a part of my life since 2004, and I'm so grateful for the opportunities it gives me. And I'm grateful to get to share my love and nerdiness around our rules with our community. My only request is that we did not cover every foul. We did not cover every game concept. We did not cover every exception. As a rule with my officials in the OWFL, they are not allowed to start a sentence with Hannah said. I often get misquoted. Words get taken out of context. I don't like it when a sentence starts with Hannah said. So please know where to find resources that can help answer your questions, like our owfl.org/officials page, like our YouTube channel. And when in doubt, ask me. Ask me in person. Ask me before or after games. Reach out to me at my email, officiating@owfl.org. I would love to hear from you. Sharing this game with you is such a gift. So thank you for taking the time. For those in the call, I'll stick around, but otherwise you are free to go. Please enjoy the rest of your evening. I hope we have great weather again tomorrow, so you're not stuck inside listening to me on a nice weather night. But thank you, and we'll look forward to connecting with you soon.